Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. After the break, I thought I would lose a lot of audience because you'll be in the exhibition hall. But after this, there's another panel that CTO Thomas will be moderating. So please stay until lunchtime, okay? So we talk about smart port, and I have a very distinguished panel here from port operators to shipping lines to also a researcher in the National University of Singapore. And this morning I thought it is useful as a follow-up from the minister's speech and of course the keynote speech on digitalization, how we could tap on it. I think the key about having ships and shipping lines digitalized, I think that's a very important aspect, and I think we heard that in the keynote speech. But equally important is when the ship calls on the port, is the infrastructure, is both the hardware and the software ready to accept the ships and operate in the most efficient manner. I think that's a very important aspect, and we wanted to have through the panel to discuss some of this. The other part is also, if you do a smart port, if it is so good, so why is not all ports are implementing smart port? I mean, it's very logical to be smart, but why are not ports using it, and what are some of the obstacles? So maybe we could also discuss on that. And whether smart port also lead to better sustainability, I think that's also a very key topic in most of the discussion and panels that we had so far. So my name is Kenneth. I'm the Assistant Chief Executive in Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. So on behalf of my colleagues here in MPA and of course Maritime Singapore, welcome to everyone. And today I just have my panel here, and I want to introduce them. Of course, just now the MC has already introduced, but I will introduce them slightly with the context of their role, and then they can actually come online and add on later on, right? So Alvin is the Head of Technology and Sustainability Solutions in PSA, so the Port Terminal Operator, which he strategize and of course formulate and implement all the future solutions. I think technologies, so Alvin and I have been working for a couple of years together in terms of all the R&D, and I think that's looking forward to his contribution. Then next to him will be Leslie. He leads the group IT, including application development, operations, and security. So that's a very important role. He doesn't just cover only Singapore, well, it is his HQ, but also cover over 65 regional and local agency offices and the fleet of vessels. So you could actually help us to share what are some of the obstacles that you see globally. Right, then of course we have Prof. Chew Ping here. He's the Director for Center of Excellence in Modeling and Simulation for Next Generation Port. So when we were building up our Tuas Port at the western side of Singapore, we know that this is our one and only chance where all the R&D capabilities could be applied to the Tuas Port in simulating it and of course optimizing the operation. So the center was set up and headed by Prof. Chew. Last but not least, Miss Annie Sophie. She is the head of APAC Customer Logistics of Maersk and has worked for Maersk the last 20 years. Very, very passionate employee of Maersk, and we will hear from her because she has she holds various leadership positions. The latest, she was the CEO of Twill, a corporate startup. And maybe also from a startup angle, then how does a smart port comes in, right? And of course, she has many, many years of experience. So maybe I will start with the customers of the port first, right? Which is both Annie and Leslie. Maybe Annie, ladies first, right? And I'll pose you this question. And before that, maybe the port, I should just define that a smart port, beyond the terminal operation, is also the whole experience a vessel comes in, from the time of pilotage to tug, to the operation, to bunkering, to water supply, goods supply, the whole logistic chain, right? So I think smart port refers to all these above domain. So to Annie and Leslie, and you can introduce yourself a bit more if you like. Could you share your ideal experience for a port call and how these lead to an area of collaboration with our marine tech shipping lines and our ports?
Thank you. I can definitely try. So thank you for the introduction. In Maersk, we sometimes have slightly complicated titles. So what Ocean Customer Logistics means is as such that I'm the lucky girl who is heading up operations for all of the Maersk assets in Asia Pacific. It also means that I'm also the lucky girl who has been being responsible for delivering for our customers through a global pandemic. And you're asking what is the ideal port call? Well, an ideal port call is when the ship arrives, that it can go into port immediately, and that it as fast as possible can be turned, so we're able to deliver to our customers on time. And today I hope we're mostly going to be talking about the future and what technology is going to provide our industry, so at the end of the day we can deliver better for our customers. But I have to say that the starting point where we sadly are today is that post-pandemic, as a container carrier, right, our ships, we were back then the most reliable carrier in the world, and we would be able to deliver for our customers on time around 90% of the time. For the industry, the average was around 80, and then came the pandemic, and the average fell below 20. And now the pandemic is behind us, but reliability has not been regained. And that means that we are still hovering around 60% as an industry. Not as an industry, sorry, that's the most reliable carriers. And a lot of that simply comes from this system of collaborations between ports and carriers and figuring out how we get back into a rhythm. And we haven't found that yet. And so in reality, to get back to a place where, 60%, that's not reliable, right? I can take no pride in that as an ocean carrier. So the first part of when you're asking what is actually a smart port, well, it's something as simple as us getting back to that there's a fixed berthing window and we arrive on time, and when we do so, there's no waiting time. We come in, the whole thing turns efficiently and as per agreed, right? As per plan, and then we can leave again. Yeah, so that's table stakes, right? The dream is, of course, that we can move away from operating a ship to start operating a ship and talking about efficiencies, to really moving into delivering for the end consumer, for the customers, and talking about value and how we can do things together with data integration, obviously with decarbonization, that will create real true value for societies and for the end customers. But we have to start with where we are today.
Thank you, Annie. Leslie, yeah.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Kenneth. Hi, I'm Leslie from PIL. We are one of Singapore-based shipping lines. As Kenneth mentioned, we are working with 65 different offices, locations around the world, and our major trade lanes are in China, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Right, this is where our focus is. Right, for PIL, our focus a lot in the last 2 years is about digitalization. Obviously, we talk a lot about efficiency. Definitely, right? Efficiency, digitalization, optimization. Those are the key areas that we are focusing on, right? So for this question about smart port, right? I thought about it, and we asked ourselves what are our key KPIs, right? The KPIs for the port, the KPIs for the carrier. So the KPIs for a carrier is obviously the shorter turnaround time, right? Shorter berth, shorter port stay, right? Shorter cargo operations, and most importantly, shorter container dwell for us, right? Those are very important to us. So how do we leverage on this? How do we focus on these key KPIs? Obviously, we need to look at solutions from the automated systems, right? to be able to automate the port operations from the stevedore ridge to lift on, lift offs, berth operations, and so on, right? Optimization capabilities, right? We are looking at flow, right? One of the keywords that we're using internally is flow, right? How to ensure that the container has minimum dwell time at the terminals, moves out, whether it's for laden, for empty, it moves out as efficiently and quickly as possible. Right? So those are the two key areas, and on top of that, of course, is the API standardization. We want to be able to provide the same standardized way to communicate through APIs, through standard data conventions across the world, not just Singapore, but rest of the world that we are calling it as well, right? So we are also looking for visibility for the customers at our offices, the various dashboards that they have for where the container is at the terminal, at the depot, and so on. So those are key areas important for PIL as a customer.
Thank you, Leslie and Annie. So maybe now I turn to the receiver, which is the port terminal operation. Alvin, what do you think about this requirement, and what are some of the challenges that you face in meeting these requirements? You know, and Leslie and Annie also have this demand from their customer, and therefore what you do impacts them and their customer. Yeah, Alvin?
Yeah, right. Thanks, Anne and Leslie, for your sharing your thoughts. I would like to distill what you just said into three key strategic pillars in which we intend to realize our future port, as well as uplift capabilities for our current portfolio. So first one is about resilience. We know that exactly as Anne has mentioned, COVID has posed a lot of manpower constraints for us, which in turn will impact the capacity handling capabilities of the port. So we really, if you look at the entire process value chain, we have successfully implemented automation in the yard, as well as the horizontal transport, as evidently shown in AGVs in Tuas Megaport. But there are a lot of other pockets of opportunities for the current brownfield terminals. One is autonomous truck technologies in a mixed mode environment. It allows us to deploy this technology in phases. Now, if you move a little to the wharf side, that's where I think the last bastion of technology or automation remains. So you look at the very laborious activities in which coning, deconing, lashing, and lashing still continue to take place. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for us. And I'll talk a little bit about the collaboration efforts with MPA and SMI on how we intend to tackle those fronts. Then as foundation pieces, then operational and technical excellence to ensure reliability, on time, the machines to work as planned will continue to remain as key foundation pieces to deliver operational excellence, service excellence. Now you move to the second pillar. I think a lot of people will talk about sustainability, and this is how we intend to look at this. It's about not just about scope 1, scope 2, but as well as scope 3 emissions. I think in scope 1, we are electrifying. But electrifying sounds as easy as buying an electric truck. But you need to understand that electric truck costs twice as much as a conventional diesel truck. And how do you have a charging infrastructure and solutions that continue to maintain the kind of high level utilization? How? So we intend to look at swap solutions, right? Then that itself is also not easy. Then we have to really converge vehicle autonomy technology with electrification to make business sense in terms of how we intend to close the cost gaps, not just about delivering the kind of capabilities. Now, pervasive electrification will then pave us the way for looking for new, cleaner grid power, like what SMS Chi alluded to this morning. Other than taking a very, very passive role and wait for green electrons to arrive, now we're actively going out to see how we can work with this value chain partners to gain access to green electricity import from the region. And I think the latest ammonia EOI called by MPA and EMA is something that offers us an opportunity to say, for PSA to take part the entire value chain to find a more substantive and meaningful role for us to play, to take part in the whole hydrogen economy and the whole hydrogen value chain. That also means that I'll now pivot towards low carbon transport, more carbon opportunities, right? PSA, we are partaking in a hydrogen POC sometime next year, where we'll be building our first refueling stations. And we are now also looking at how we can participate and help ammonia bunkering needs, right? As well as green fuel adoption by the shipping lines. And now I'll pivot to the last pillar, which is about digitalization. It's about the ability for us to rely on what we call digital platforms, right, to connect the nodes and networks to improve enhance what we call connectivity, which is very important. We talk about OptiArrive, whereby we talk about just-in-time arrival of vessels through data, exchange between vessels and the port, right? Then to the time whereby within the port, we also have other digital solutions such as Prism or ACE, whereby we maximize the utilization of the vessel, fill up the slots. We also have Slot Expert, a digital marketplace whereby liners can exchange the slots, right? Then as we move out to the land-based logistics, that's where OptiTruck will also make a difference, whereby we reduce the number of empty trips needed for the trucks to move from port to other logistic nodes such as warehouses or depots, but also to improve asset utilization through job pooling. So, so you can see the entire end-to-end capabilities for us to look at, to enable a green end-to-end supply chain perspective. I'll stop here for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Alvin. I was just browsing through many of the good questions that are being posted by the audience, and maybe as we progress on this discussion, we can also address some of it. I mean, Alvin discussed some parts of it on the goal of the sustainability, right? So I think how Smart Port also addresses this sustainability issue become an important area. Yeah. But I want to ask Prof. Chew now, given that recently we also invested another 10 million into the center. What are some of the technology and R&D areas you think Smart Port can look at? Because there's also a question here of what are some of the research areas relating to Smart Port. So maybe that's a good lead in to Prof. Chew. Prof. Chew.
Thank you for the questions. So as you know, my center has just been awarded another 10 million to continue to research in the digital twin technology for the next 5 years. And also many of you would know what a digital twin is. Essentially, it's a virtual model that is able to reproduce the exact behavior of a real systems. And with that, it can provide what you call very rich insights. For example, able to tell how the system is performing, and as well as locating vulnerabilities as well. So with this kind of capability in the digital twin area, obviously you can see a lot of potential in it, where there's potential of R&D, where you can actually develop, as what just now Evan was mentioning, smart decision support tools, to help to ensure that the port processes are working in an optimal way to reduce wastage of what you call unproductive move, and also coming up with better designs in port, especially when you're talking about greenfield ports where you need to determine the layout of the port, what would be the right layout to use. And with that kind of capabilities, right, then you can see that potentially there is a lot of R&D potential. Let me give you some example. Like for example, in my center, right, we are actually working on coming up with how to design future ports. And this is where digital twin can actually come in. The reason why it is very useful is because of the fact that, you don't have to actually do a physical systems to be able to test it out, but all this can be done in a virtual environment where you can look into research like what would be the right layout to have, what would be the size of the storage block that you want to have, and also the kind of equipment combinations, that will need to actually support the pod productivity. So in that sense, you can see that you can also introduce what would be the current technology or the future technology can actually be implemented into this pod, even without this technology being existing, to look into the impact on how this future technology can help to whether it can help to improve the pod significantly or not. So you can think of a digital twin like a sandbox, where you can actually try out different innovation, different ideas, technologies, and see actually how it will perform under such scenarios. So that's number one. Number two, a digital twin, right, can also help in looking, as I mentioned, in finding advanced operation strategy to ensure that the pod systems are working in a very productive manner. And a good thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that you don't have to actually try it out in the physical system because it'll be very disruptive. You can always test it out in the digital twin environment. And then from there, you can see whether this particular strategy is promising. And as you know, operation strategy is very important. I mean, even though you have a physical infrastructure, but what drives the pod to work well, that is where the operation strategy comes in. It's like a brain to the pod and how you actually want the pod to operate. And so that is where the digital twin can come in. And then the final, it's not the final one, but the other research that my center is very keen to work on is, are we able to use a digital twin to work with real systems, with the real pod systems? It means that the digital twin is connected to the pod, like the terminal operating systems or IoTs, where it can actually collect data from them to be able to know what is the current state the pod is going into, so that it can be used as a predictive tool, like for example, in disruptive management, where if there's a certain event that has happened that might disrupt the pod, like for example, there's a power outage in a certain zone, or there is a spillage somewhere near the channel. So how will these events actually impact upon the pod? And so this digital twin will be able to, because it's able to reproduce the exact behavior of the pod, and it's even able to run faster than the actual time, so you can actually play out the scenario and see how it will actually impact. And from there, before the disaster happened, right, you can actually know what will be the problem, where will be the hotspot, and so you can come up with mitigation strategy. The other one is on real time. For example, especially if a digital twin can actually be planted to work together with a real physical systems, then you can also use it, in real-time operations where, for example, there's a certain event happen, and then you want to know, should I choose this, should I deploy this AGV to this place, or should I do it in other place, or should a key crane, be used to cater for these activities or not? And so you can try out different scenarios and let the digital twin play out and see which will be the best option to use. So this is some of the potential of using digital twins in helping to improve the performance of a system. And this is essentially what my center is working on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Chu. And so besides the benefit of sustainability, I think if you use some of this R&D, you could use the cyber physical, right? Meaning you actually test out first before deploying a whole fleet of operations and equipment and assets to make your port smarter and to also, of course, meet the demands of the shipping lines. But maybe now back to Annie, you talk about, because you also have an interest in the technology startup space. What I think among the audience, there are also many tech players, partners. One of the question is, out there could be a lot of solutions, right? So everyone is eager to translate from R&D into a product. And then they have a product. And then they come to you. You are one Annie, and there are maybe 20 of the startup that is coming to you. How do you handle such? They all say that, with my solution, I'm going to improve this whole reliability, for instance. How would you cope with that? And maybe that is where we want to strike a collaboration model, right?
Yeah, so let me start with saying I think the maritime industry is number one, fantastic place to be a startup within technology, because let's be honest, it's a technology that still lives a little bit in the dinosaur ages, so there's so much potential. And on the other hand, it's a difficult industry because it's very difficult to get through. I work for a large container carrier who, for years and years, we've actually been trying different models of how to bring technology into our DNA. And I think if you're a startup, I think right now it's actually difficult because you have to figure out right now from each of the companies or each of the players who to speak to and so on. I don't think there's a very uniform model across the landscape of how we do it. I can say that in Maersk we've taken different avenues. We both have our own corporate VC called Maersk Growth, where we're making our own investments in technology we believe will have the capability of transforming our industry. We have a big innovation center where we are looking at partnering with companies that have good ideas. And then lastly, we've tried out with corporate startups. As you started with saying, I was the lucky girl who was the CEO of one of them. I have to admit here that it was a success and then it was not anymore. And I don't think Maersk has figured out how to use corporate startups in an efficient way, to be honest. We're very good at starting something on the side. When we have to integrate it, then it goes less well. I don't think there's one model for this. One of the reasons is that our industry lacks standards a lot, right? And there are still so many operators that you need to speak to. But the only thing I can encourage startups to do is that if you know this industry well, you know that there's some players in the industry who are very, I would say, who are leading it, you know, who are leaning into technology. I, by the way, think PSA is a wonderful example of a port that's really on the forefront of this. But I'm not sure I have like the answer for how to do it. But like anywhere else, if you're a startup, it's about knowing your customers and understanding who are the most likely to be interested in the technology you are sitting on.
Thanks, Annie. And since you mentioned PSA, I'll ask Alvin, because Alvin also take care of PSA Unbox. You know, again, many startup solutions, you know, anyone wants to try out in our port. So what would be have you seen a good sustainable model in which we could sustain this innovation?
I think it goes both ways. How we intend to reach out to, okay, in my current role as sustainability and also tech solutions, I'm looking at I'm responsible for what we call as a midstream innovation value chain role, right, in which we develop solutions and capabilities. Downstream is how we intend to proliferate and scale. Now, with my Unbox role, then I'm completing the entire value chain in terms of I'm moving upstream to look for new disruptive technologies ahead of time, ahead of needs, so that we have sufficient runway. I think at the end of the day, gestation period from an idea to MVP to then something that works and can be productized and commercially ready takes time. So this is where, in order to curate our search, usually deal flows for VCs is that depending on how early stage you are, for maybe even you get one startup that's able to survive in our environment or do well in environment, you need to look for another 100. But if you go to later stages, maybe 1 to 30. So which means that the search for startups that will continue to do well will be a very extensive one. So this is why we collaborate with other VC networks. We hunt in a pack. We share, exchange notes. We then help us to triangulate towards the right kind of startups. Again, like I said, we also have involved ourselves in R&D efforts. Of course, we support for MPA and SMI, right? So we work with local institutions like SUTD, NUS, NTU in various parts of the investigation of new technologies. Where PSA Unbox can come in is, other than our mandate to invest in startups, so of course strategic and financial returns, but we also are now looking at corporate venture builds, which means that the technology that we have develop ourselves, scene for ourselves, then we can actually create commercial spin-off opportunities. Hence, accelerating from the translation of an idea, a capability to a product that we can not just benefit our ports for the greater community at large as well.
Thank you, Alvin. And of course, I think to many of the startup, I think, they also go to Leslie, right? Many startup, I'm sure, come to you, many solution providers, and you talk about API earlier on. Then, so maybe help us with two aspects. One is about standards. One is, you could say I have an API and I link to a port, but the port had to link to many shipping lines, and therefore many APIs. The other one is the solution providers come to you, everyone having different standards. Have you found a model in which you can seamlessly or collaboratively, encourage innovation, but at the same time making sure that perhaps cybersecurity is being taken care of? Because this is also one of the questions that the audience has. Okay, Leslie, throw you a very difficult question.
Hi. So I think first, I always keep an open mind, right? We are always, I've been shipping for 10, 15 years, right? I'm always surprised by new solutions, right? Keep an open mind, look out for new solutions. And we also work with the various startups to test their solutions in a very practical environment, right? We have to ensure, because for example, if you look at a vessel technology, right? I have to ensure that these things, the technology can work and can be deployed across all our vessels, right? It's not about deploying in one location at the HQ level and centralize, and that's it, right? We have to make sure that the solution is cost effective and can work with minimal maintenance at sea, right? So we always keep a very open mind in terms of working with various technology providers reaching out to us. We also have formed a technology team that actively works with the various startups that MPA, PSA has set up in terms of the startup scenes to speak with various promising startup leaders, right, in looking at their various, evaluating their various technology capabilities, right. On the question of APIs, right, it has always been an ongoing problem, right. We want to develop a standardized method to be able to communicate with various ports, but there are always different other ports that are not able to follow the same standards, right. So we tend to look at two key areas where where there are new solution providers in these functionalities. For example, right, lightweight solutions. Solutions has to be cost effective, has to be lightweight, right, able to be deployed easily on the cloud environment as a SaaS offering, right, and to connect with our in-house legacy systems, right. Various companies has a lot of legacy systems that we are still managing with, right. So new solution providers have to allow us to be able to connect easily via APIs, right, to these SaaS systems, and to be able to work with the various ports in a global context, right. Of course, providing all these technology capabilities, then we have to balance the other part, which is the security, cybersecurity, right. So in terms of cybersecurity, we have two flavors to maintain, or rather three, right. One at the HQ level, one at the vessels, right, you have IT, OT equipments, and finally one at the agency level, the various offices that we have, right. So our general strategy is to be able to centralize as much of the IT systems in the offices at the HQ level, right, and the vessels to be able to provide necessary preventive controls as much as possible, right, in order to allow them to still operate, but with minimal need to understand how to manage the cybersecurity equipments or controls on board the vessel. Right, so yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. Maybe Prof. Chew want to ask you this question because I think some audience are also quite keen to hear. You know, we always talk about this global optimization versus local optimization, right? You can be very efficient locally, but then you lose your global. Likewise, you know, many of these global standards. So if you were to create one, some ports may need to be disrupted, right? Because if you want to look at it at a global level. So maybe from an optimization angle, how do you usually solve a local versus a global optimization problem? Because there's also a point, very valid point here, is about trade-offs. I think constraint programming is all about trade-off. And there's also this element about the seafarers. Does a smart port also has a positive impact to the seafarers? Yeah. So maybe Prof. Chew, on your thinking about this global optimization versus local optimization in the context of smart port. And then later on, I will wrap up with our panelists, each giving your thought about the key takeaway to the audience about smart port. What are some of the challenges that you like the audience to solve? And of course, where this whole ecosystem should be heading. Yeah. So Prof. Chew first.
Okay, thank you for this question. Yeah, it's a tough question, but anyway, for us as researchers, right, we always would love to solve a global optimization rather than a local optimization. The reason being is that usually, like even as a professor in the class, right, I always teach a student, you know, when you try to solve local optimization, you will never be able to achieve a global optima. And the reason why is because, you know, if you solve locally, you are just solving that particular area, but not taking into account how this decision will impact on other areas as well. Like for example, in any organization where you have different divisions, where everyone works in silo, everybody have a targets to meet. And so for them, they are interested in their own targets and they try to meet their targets. But meeting that targets doesn't mean that the overall organization goal will be met. And that is a key thing why we always like to solve a global optimization problem. But one of the barrier or the challenges to solve a local optimization is, are we able to get data for that? The key question is, data is the most important one. Without data, right, where we can actually use to use it, right, then there is no way where we can actually solve a global optimization problem because we don't have the information, you know. And so we have to trade off, as what you say, that given the information that we have to solve within what we know. And if there is anything that is beyond, then of course we have to make certain assumptions on that, but that may not give you the precise solution that you want, but at least it's still better than not having any. So I hope I've answered that question, you know, in terms of local optimization. So where does it come in? So for example, you know, if you want to, let's say, talk about just-in-time system. So the question is what this morning when the keynote speaker, Roger Holmes, was talking about, right? It's not just digitalization, because digitalization technology is there. You have people who can actually work on it and come up with technology. But you need to have a collective of government and port communities to come together to be able to collaborate and share the data, you know. And with this data available, if it's able to get it on a global scale, then obviously, you know, it's like a big data where you can actually use it to help you to solve a problem that actually that is where you want to drive towards to. And so that's important, you know, where people come into the picture, people have to come into this equation, you know, to be able to help to share data, and that will be where the ideal situation will be, where you can actually use that to help to solve a problem globally. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Chew. So we have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to, you know, ask the panelists each to, maybe starting from Annie, your closing remarks on the topic of smart port and how, as an ecosystem, we could collaborate together in order to move forward. So what are some of the concrete steps we could take from this panel?
So I think that my first thing is this thing with first things first, right? We need to get back to reliability, to kind of reinstate the world order when it comes to how we actually do operations. After that, there needs a new level of collaboration that I think is it's required at a much higher level than what we've ever seen before, also before the pre-pandemic. It's about whether it is digital connectivity, it's about data sharing and so on, so we can move away from operating a ship to actually connecting cargo to deliver for the final customers. And lastly, then the future is green, right? So I really appreciate everything that's going on with trying to decarbonize also the port operation. And just to call out, obviously the container liner industry of this world, we need help very much from the ports to enable us to fully decarbonize container shipping.
Thank you, Annie. Prof. Chiu?
Yeah, okay, so I have two takeaways. First is that since just now Kenneth asked me about optimization, right? So optimization is very important. I think there are two reasons. One is, as the keynote speaker also mentioned, right? I mean, we will expect the cost of using renewable energy will be going to be very expensive. And so because of this, right, then we need to have some innovative way on how can we reduce the cost. And so if you are able to optimize the process, share resources, pool the resources together to ensure that they are fully utilized, then that's one way to reduce the cost. The second part is, of course, on data sharing. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, in order to be able to achieve the goal that you want, to be able to ensure that processes are able to move smoothly like just-in-time system, you need to have a data sharing platform where people are willing to put in non-sensitive data, but still useful to help to do the optimization for a just-in-time system. Yeah.
Thank you. Leslie?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, clearly it's an ecosystem, right? We need the entire ecosystem, maritime ecosystem specifically, right? Of all the various promising startup technology companies to work together, to collaborate, right? And be very open in sharing of successes, failures that they've done, right? To be able to improve the technology product further, right? And of course, the various customers, the supply chain, the carriers, the trucking companies, right? To be able to adopt all the solutions actively, right? Then we can see and uplift the entire economy, right? And the maritime ecosystem. Thanks.
Alvin?
Yeah, smart and green port, they go hand in hand, and they form the key nodal capabilities to enable a green and efficient end-to-end supply chain. I concur with Prof. Chiu on one very key aspect on data. Data availability and data quality is of utmost importance, without which we can't build a very capable port community systems in which we can influence the whole logistics network as a whole. So SG TradeX, in my opinion, is a very good and open and trusted platform for us to get hold of data, gain access to data. So I encourage all our key stakeholders to come on board so that we can freely use that means to then build a more capable ecosystem. So I just want to end with two quotes. One is serious and one is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So the serious one is, I think Elon Musk once says, it's always necessary to strive for collective enlightenment. So the way I see it is that with collaboration, we get wiser and better together. The last one is a bit tongue-in-cheek. For those who are Star Wars fans, as the Mandalorians always say, this is the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all our panelists. I think this whole smart port linking to sustainability, reliability is all about thinking. I think from my point of view, it's also about looking at the whole supply chain, right? Essentially, the whole shipping industry is to move the cargo around the world so that we can bring energy, goods, and essential services to various parts of the world. So all nodes in the whole supply chain needs to be efficient, right? And of course, this is a challenge because a global optimization problem is we will be depend on a lot of data and the use of technology, use of AI, use of many of the bright ideas that our startup and innovators have. But at the same time, we must continue to press on because this is a goal in which we need to all move towards. And of course, many of the organizations, standard bodies are all there to help us to harmonize some of the standards so that we have a better level playing field so that innovation can happen at the very safe way and that, our stakeholders across the whole supply chain, whether it's from port, from the shipping lines to the shippers, eventually to consumers like us, could actually benefit from a more efficient and reliable and consistent smart port. So with that, please put our hands together and thank my panelists here. Thank you.